Hello and welcome to the Lou Review. I'm your host, Rosa Hart, and today I've got Drew Shryock with me today. He is the new owner of the Whiskey Row walking tour, and I actually got a chance to go on your tour, so it's so good to see you again, Drew.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me to your podcast. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I got to listen to you for a couple hours and didn't even get tired of it.
That's a good thing.
Right? It's like still coming back for more.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than the deer in the headlights look when you're talking to people on a tour. It's like, it's just not going through anymore.
Right. People get maxed out. But no, I felt it was pretty well paced. So can you describe your Whiskey Row walking tour and what all is involved in that?
Sure. It's a tour I started in March of this year, and it's the history of bourbon distilling here in Louisville, plus also the history of if you went into a distillery and they told you how whiskey was being turned into bourbon or how they're making bourbon whiskey. Mm-hmm. That's what the tour is about. But also it's on historic Main Street in Whiskey Row. Mm-hmm. And Whiskey Row back then basically was right about Brook and 1st Street, and it went all the way up to about 11th and 12th Street is where it ended. Okay. And that was where a lot of the major whiskey distillers were in that area. But my tour will start out at the Bourbon Trail, which is located in the Fraser History Museum. It's the official starting place of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. Mm-hmm. And we start there. That's where my guests will meet. And then we will head down Main Street. Fraser is at the intersection of 8th and Main, and we will head down Main Street going towards 2nd. And 1st and 2nd Street on Main was the heart of Whiskey Row. That's where a lot of the major distillers were in that area.
And so, that's where like Old Forester and stuff is now?
Yes, currently there's quite a few there. There's, if you go up to 10th or 11th, I believe it's 10th in Main, that's where Peerless is, Peerless Distilling. And then Louisville Slugger is now involved in the bourbon business as well. It's called Barrels and Billets. Mm-hmm. You can do that, part of their tour. They
couldn't miss out.
No, they couldn't. Well, that's where they originally started, was in J. Frederick Hillerick. When he came to the U.S., he immigrated here from Germany, and he started out in the lumber mill business. Okay. And he made actually bourbon staves, and the staves are what makes up a bourbon barrel. Mm-hmm. And so they were trying to get back to their roots. The billets is what is actually a cylinder tube of wood, and that is what they carve into a baseball bat. Oh, wow. So that's where they get the name barrels and billets, going back to the roots and also bringing them up to present day.
So they started making bourbon barrels, transitioned to making bats.
Yes, correct. In 1884.
And now they're just adding back in the bourbon element?
Yes. So they kind of come full circle.
They did. Yeah. Wow. And that was really neat that we got to go into several different spots and have tastings along the way. It wasn't just walk down and hear the stories and see the places, which I love the demonstration you had with the magnet. Yes,
the cast iron storefronts. Yeah. Yes. So as we go down Main Street, we also go to Buzzard's Roost for a tasting. They just opened up in April.
It was so nice.
Yes, isn't that beautiful? They've done a beautiful job.
A bourbon truffle with
yes. Their neighbor across the street, Art Edibles, is what makes their bourbon truffles, and they really go great with their bourbon.
Oh, they go and their rye whiskey themselves too, but you know.
Yeah, I know. And I'm a chocoholic, so it's like, I'm in heaven when I go there.
It's a complete experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the tastings were at Buzzard's Roost, Barrels and Billets, and then Evan Williams.
Evan Williams is where the last tasting is. Mm-hmm. And then we'll continue walking down Main Street. Evan Williams is at 6th and Main Street. And we'll continue walking down Main Street. And then we'll pass a few more distilleries. Michner's is at the corner of 8th and Main, just to kind of give you an idea how this huge rebirth and revitalization of Whiskey Row has happened. And basically in the last 12 years, 13 years, because Michner's was the first one to come back in there in 2011. They announced they were coming back into Whiskey Row. They were kind of like the first domino to fall. And now we have Old Forester. I kind of stopped, not in front of Old Forester, but across the street from Old Forester, and that's in between 1st and 2nd Street on Main. as well. But it's also, one other thing about it, it's the history of some of the well-known distillers that were in the city, like George Garvin Brown, who's the founder of Brown-Forman. We'll talk about Julian Pappy Van Winkle and how he started out with Weller, and it was actually Weller Brothers, but he eventually bought Weller out, and eventually they merged with Stitzel-Weller in 1933, and how he ran Stitzel-Weller. And it talk about here, the history of him. We'll talk about Paul Jones Jr., who owned Four Roses Bourbon, and Evan Williams as well, who was actually the first licensed distiller here in our state.
And there was even a potential story of who might have been the inspiration for The Great Gatsby.
Yes,
but we won't give away all of your secrets because
right.
you got to go on the tour with Drew to learn all those good things. So he's literally a wealth of knowledge, and I just loved hearing all about it. And on the one hand, I would just want to share it all on this podcast, but then people wouldn't want to come on your tour, except for tastings.
Understand.
Which, I do want to commend you for arranging those tastings, because don't you have them kind of fit staggered with the tours available in the individual distilleries? So if the tours are all full that day, didn't we come in on the half hour or something?
Yes,
Barrels of Billets, where
I have it worked out. Where we are not going to take a tour of the distillery, but we will go in there to sample at the distillery.
So if you just want a tasting, you're not trying to see them all. I know a lot of people are like, I know how it was done. After you do for 5 distillery tours, you're like, what else am I going to learn about how you make it? Well, and there is a lot of different nuance you can learn, but if you're not kind of geeking out over it, like some of us, then you might not care to see all that. You're like, I just want to taste it.
Yes, a lot of people do.
This is a great way to just go in, and it's a flight at each place.
That's correct.
So you're getting not just one thing, but I love flights because you get to compare. And so you might like one out of the 3, or you might learn, like I did. Michter's taught me I like rye whiskey.
Yes,
because
exactly.
I like theirs. Maybe not anybody else's, but
I understand.
But that's things you learn by trying. So that's a really neat experience you're offering people.
Yeah, I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun, and it's going on. It's kind of taken some legs now, and it's up and running again, which I like, because I'm getting quite a few calls now for people wanting to book tours. So it's definitely getting busier and busier.
And how much is a tour now?
The tour is $49 per person.
Well, it's well worth it. You get 3 tastings and some exercise. So
yes.
Walk it off in between.
Plus, you get to enjoy Main Street. I think we're very lucky in Louisville because we've done a very good job, for the most part, holding on to these old historic buildings.
Yes.
And I'm talking about buildings going back into... The oldest one on Main Street is actually Actors Theater of Louisville. That was built in 1837. But it's really neat because you'll see these... Part of the tour is the history of these storefronts and the history of these cast iron storefronts as well.
Yeah.
Which I won't tell much about. They have to come take the tour.
Try it.
That's right.
So how did you get into this?
I worked for the city of Louisville in economic development for 22 years, and I was eligible to retire, and I did. And so I started working for a bourbon tour company, and I started taking people out on bourbon tours. Okay. And I really enjoyed it. 2 distilleries, correct. Tours. I went out on what's called the Bourbon Trail. And what amazes me, back then, there were really 8 major distilleries.
Oh, well, that was a lot shorter trip than what I'm trying to do. Oh, my.
Yeah.
Wow. You could say you accomplished that a lot easier back then.
Yeah. And you could, yeah. But it is amazing how this has all exploded in the last 15 years. And there's still new bourbon distilleries coming on board. Yeah. And that's what I found in my research when I was looking at Whiskey Row, basically from the 1870s to pre-Prohibition, just how whiskey exploded, and bourbon whiskey in particular exploded in that time frame here in Louisville. And it's kind of like we're going right back to the roots. We reset the clock back 130 years. With
a lot more safety implications.
Yeah, exactly.
Like we have a lot more protections, and it's a lot safer now than it was then.
Yes.
Now, maybe you could help educate me on this a little bit. Now, okay, we're in the bourbon boom, but places like Japan were obsessed with whiskey before that, right?
Yes.
Isn't Japan now like the biggest purchaser of bourbon right now, or is it just whiskey overall?
They like whiskey. The Japanese people do love whiskey. The biggest one, haven't seen any recent numbers, but they love Four Roses bourbon, and the reason is that it was only available in those markets after World War II ended. Okay. Then they were bought by Kirin Liquors, or Kirin Beer, I'm sorry. And Kirin is a Japanese-owned company, and they've reintroduced Four Roses back into the American markets again.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah. So it was only available in certain Asian markets back in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Man. But they've reintroduced it. But basically, all bourbons do well, but they like whiskeys as well. When I say whiskeys, Irish and Scotch whiskeys do very well in Asian countries and also in Australia. I can't tell you how many Australian people, or Aussies, I've taken out on the Bourbon Trail, and they are a fun group to go with. They really are. They're a lot of fun.
Well, we have a lot in common, and, a lot of their ancestors probably came from Scotland and Ireland and England, and they had a lot of whiskey there. Yeah. And I don't know much about whiskey in Australia.
Well, Australia was actually set up as a penal colony.
Yeah.
And a lot of Irish and Scottish and English prisoners, that's where they sent them to get them out of the country, so to speak.
Do they have a big whiskey market there as far as making it?
Not in Australia, not that I know of. They may have one or two whiskey distillers that I'm not familiar with.
That's why they come all the way to Kentucky.
They do. Oh yeah, I mean they do. They do. I mean when they come here, they really think they've made it to heaven, and I'm not overplaying that when I say that. They go crazy when they come here because all the bourbons that they're very hard for them to find over there.
Yeah.
They have.
We think it's hard for us to find something nice.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, certain things that we can get ready available, they don't have over there. And they do. They love coming over here and seeing all these wonderful bourbons we have for sale.
That is so neat. I haven't not encountered that yet, but I've been really fascinated to learn more about that. So what is a good resource to learn more about the story of the bourbon boom? Are there any books or anything you'd recommend? Or
there's several books. Michael Veitch, who works at the Filson Club, the Filson Historic Society, he's written a book on basically a lot of the history of bourbon whiskey, but also specifically here in Louisville. And there's another guy named Chuck, and he has a blog page too. Chuck Crowrity is his name, and he's written several books on bourbon, which I've read. His books are fascinating. If you really are someone who enjoys history and the history of bourbon, I recommend those books because they're very detailed, but they're a fun read. It's not detailed where you kind of get lost and you kind of
this is my insomnia cure.
Yeah, exactly. It's not something you would want to read before you go to bed. It's something that if you really love the history of bourbon, these books are really, really good quality books to read.
Okay. And have you read Fred Minnick's book?
No, I haven't. I have heard of it, but no, I haven't read Fred. Yeah. And I don't know Fred personally, but we've met several times, and I know who Fred is. But Fred has done a very good job, too.
I need to read his book. I think I got it, but I just listened to him on the Bourbon Pursuit podcast, too. Yeah. So, as podcasters, we're all listening to each other's stuff.
Yes, that's good. Well, that's how you learn.
It is. I love learning through other people's stories and experiences. But, when you go back in history, the people with those stories may not be around. So we got to have historians like you to keep the stories going. Right.
The best one we still have left is Jimmy Russell, who's the master distiller at Wild Turkey. Oh. And Jimmy, I don't know his official age, but I would say he's definitely probably in his early to mid 80s. Oh, wow. But Jimmy knows all those old distillers, those master distillers.
He knew them.
Oh, yeah, he knew them all. And one of the most pleasant gentlemen you'll ever meet. He never meets a stranger. Just very sweet, very kind. When he's at the distillery and people see him, he always signs their bottles for them. And he always, thank you for coming. I appreciate you coming. And I've teased him over the years that you should write a book. You should write a book. And he always says, that's what people tell me. That's what people tell me. But it's just that wealth of information he has and just the stories he could share.
Right. Somebody needs to follow him around with a transcription thing turned on. Just record the stories as they go so he doesn't have to sit down to write anything.
Well, the good thing about it, his son, Eddie, is I don't know if he's official master distiller there or the assistant. I don't know if they're co-titled, but I'm sure he is he has really passed along a lot of those stories
Good.
to his son Eddie.
Good.
But you were asking me, back up a little bit, you were asking me
sorry.
why I would want to get involved with this, and I
Yeah.
start taking people out on the Bourbon Trail, and as this thing exploded, more and more distilleries started opening. In the last couple of years, as I was taking people out, I realized a lot of people can't get into the distilleries.
Because they're just full.
They're all
booked.
full.
I think
And-
Old Forester's like 3 months out booked,
Yes.
and you can't book in the 4th month, so you just gotta wait till
Correct.
it opens, and then it fills up again.
Correct, and you have to wait 90 days. That's what they do. They
Or
only
just
book
walk
90
in.
days in advance,
Oh
and
my
that's what a
gosh.
lot of them are doing. And I realized when I would pick up people to take them on these tours, they were saying to me, well, we try to get into Old Forester, or we try to get into Mickner, so we try to get into this distillery or that distillery, but they're all booked up.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that they should have booked, 4 to 6 weeks in advance is what they should have done. And I thought, there's got to be a role I can play here where I could get them in there to taste, and they're going to hear the exact same thing from me that they would hear on if they went to a bourbon distillery.
Well, a lot of the same things, but also a lot of different things.
Yes, they're going to get some history of Louisville plus the history of some of these distillers that put Louisville on the map.
Because if people have done these tours, I don't want them to think that they're not going to get anything out of your tour. Because,
Right.
I did the Evan Williams tour, and I thought it was a great experience. Honestly, I thought it was a great place to start. By the way, Evan Williams is not my sponsor, but if they want to be, just give me a call.
There you go.
Because I am convinced, it is a great place to start. But yeah, nothing you said on your tour was anything I learned there. So I think because they all focus on their own story, and you're kind of weaving it together, all of it, and how it kind of chronologically happened.
Correct.
And
Correct.
how they interacted with one another at the time, which you don't get because they're telling their own story by itself.
Yes. And that's what I thought. I thought there's got to be a unique way I can present this. We can get into the distilleries without an appointment, but they're going to learn about the history again of distilling and the history of Louisville too as well, because I throw in some bits and pieces about Louisville. But bourbon and Louisville's history are intertwined.
Yeah, they really are. Which you can learn about at Evan Williams as well.
Yes.
They have such a great video presentation, by the way. Anyway, let's see. So you did government work and then bourbon distillery tours, and then are you still doing that as well, or is this your full-time thing? Are you doing this?
This is where I'm
part-time?
concentrating most of my time. I'm not going out into the Bourbon Trail. I'm not doing distillery, or I'm not going out into the Bourbon Trail. I'm concentrating more on growing this business. That's what I want to do.
Fantastic.
And I love going out on the trail. I really do. I love going to those distilleries. I met so many wonderful people over the years at these distilleries, and it's always nice to rekindle those friendships again in this post-COVID world we're in.
Yes.
But it's just nice to meet those people again and talk to them. But there's nothing I love more going into a distillery, and there's nothing I love more than going into a rick house with all those bourbon barrels in there where that whiskey's aging. I love the smell of a rick house.
I really like it when you can do the tasting afterwards and it tastes like the rick house.
Yes.
It doesn't sound good, but it tastes good. I don't know. It's so authentic.
Yeah.
It's like, I know that really did come from there.
Yeah, you did.
You can't escape it.
Yeah, they didn't sneak it in the back door.
Nope.
They rolled it right out of that rick house and bottled it.
Yeah. I don't know. I just really enjoy it. So where do you see your whiskey walking tours going?
That's funny because sometimes these things just take a life of their own.
Yeah.
A lot of times when we open our business and we think, and that was one of the things that I did in economic development. I was over our small business lending program, so I helped out. I helped startup businesses get financing. Is what I did. So I learned a lot over the years from dealing with startup businesses. To be careful of certain things that you want to do. And I always tell myself there is no way I would ever want to be a small business owner. But I realized
Look at you now.
I know, this is one of those things. Never say never. But it was just one of those things I thought, I know the history of Louisville. I know the history of bourbon. Let's just throw it up against the wall and see if it sticks. And it is sticking. But the question is, where is this going to go? What I'd like to do is kind of build up on the tour experience. What I need to do is build, stay focused on what I'm doing now, but also see if I can kind of go down different roads with it as far as if there's groups that want to come into town. I've had several groups call me and they want to do group tours. And the issue with some of the distilleries, they don't want people in there over a certain number.
Yeah.
But
they just don't have room.
They don't have the
over a
room.
certain number.
Correct.
And they got to set up all the flights to be ready.
Exactly.
And,
Exactly. And that's what I'm working with them on, because there's getting those people who want to go in the distilleries, they can, but I'm trying to see if there's a way I can make it work for them as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, how big of a group have you encountered that wants to come that's too big?
Right now, I would keep it at 20 people.
Or less.
But I was speaking with a woman today that I've done. One of the other things I do is I hop on these coach buses. I'm a step-on guide tour. And when the coach buses come to Louisville, I give them a historic overview of Louisville. Yeah. And she called me today because I met with her back in April. I toured her group around, and she said, I want to know if you can we're going to come back in May of next year, and I want to know if we can get into some of these distilleries that you were talking about on your tour. And I said, well, how many are you expecting? She said, right now, 30 to 40 people. And I said, well, that's going to be a challenge. I'm not going to say no. But it's these things that you don't expect.
That would have to be a one-time thing versus we're going to do this several times a day. Or
right.
How many would you do in a day? You just do one in a day?
I do one a day right now. I would like to increase it. But again, I want to get this thing up and running, get some legs underneath it.
The more comfortable each location is with accommodating you, the less it'll seem cumbersome. I hope.
One important lesson that I've learned over the years by being in economic development is when you have something that's successful, you got to make sure that is your baby, and you got to make sure you raise that baby. Because I'll give you an example. I've seen a lot of restaurants follow this road, where they open up a location in a certain part of town, and everybody's going there, and then they open up another location 5-6 miles away from where they are. And they don't have the same following anymore, or they don't have the numbers
where their following is.
Right, it's not where their following is, or they think that they're going to build that following. And what happens is that second location drains the money out of the first business, and then they get into big problems as far as being able to pay off their debts. And that's why it's always smart to start small and build that concept up, but don't be afraid to take some risk. Yeah. You've got to learn how to take some risk. But I've seen countless businesses expand way too fast, and they get way ahead of themselves, not realizing that they've overextended themselves, and now they have all this debt they have to pay off.
Where would you recommend a small business go if they want to scale up and they could use some advice for that? Since you're not working in economic development.
Well, there is an organization in town. It's the Small Business Development Center. Yeah. And you can go. They will help you with your business plan. And they're a very good group of people. They've been doing business counseling. They're basically business coaches. Yeah. And you're one of their players, and they're going to tell you, this is what you need to do in order to open that business. Be careful. If you're going to sign a lease, make sure you read the language in the lease. A lot of people open up these small businesses and they don't realize they have to hire people, they have to pay the people, they have to pay taxes, they have to pay their monthly bills. And next thing you know, before they know it, they're overwhelmed. And that's what makes the business suffer. Yeah.
And I think they do classes on like social media and like how to build a website maybe. Exactly. And SEO and all that good stuff as well. So it's not just like brick and mortar stuff. It's also those soft things that where you have to build that internet presence to let people know to come see you in person.
Exactly. Yeah. I would recommend anyone, if they want to start up a business, make sure you know what that business is and do your research early. Because a lot of people, they have this concept and they think they can get it up and running within 3 to 6 months. I started working on this concept back in August of last year. With my goal of opening in March. And I was very proud I opened in March. But I laid out the steps that I needed to take in order to make sure I met that March deadline. And it's all about patience and making sure you get good, correct information. Yeah. But also, if you don't have the money to do it yourself, to make sure you have a lending institution that's going to help you with the amount of money that you're going to need. And working capital is the most important thing when you start up a small business. You have to make sure you have plenty of cash. However that is, cash in the bank or personal equity, you make sure you have to have something to fall back on, because it'll never go off the way you think it is. You don't open the door and everybody's standing in line ready to come in. It takes time. It really does. So it's always best to lay out a good plan before you open the door, so to speak, to your business.
And a lot of people just can't do that on their own. I mean, it takes a village, doesn't it?
It does.
Of learning, and because the people who have these visionary ideas of things that have never been done before that they want to share with the world are probably not always going to be the people who understand all these nitty-gritty details and have that wisdom of experience. So
exactly. And
they don't need to do it by themselves, right?
Yeah. I mean, the tools are there, but you have to be patient, and you have to learn how to plan and organize. And if you do that, you're on a good, solid foundation. You really are. And I also recommend, if this is something you want to do, I had a cousin of mine one time. She wanted to open up a coffee shop. And I said, if you want to do that, I highly recommend you work in a coffee shop. She never had done coffee business at all.
Gosh.
But she thought, and she had a great idea. And I said, you need to work in a coffee shop for a couple months, get the lay of the land, figure out who they order from and where they get all their product and their supplies. And she did. And she ran her coffee business for about 4 years. And someone wanted to buy it from her, and she sold it. So
sweet.
Yeah.
That's great.
So it's just do your homework, be patient, plan ahead.
Well, that is good advice, Drew. I really appreciate you sharing all your stories and experience, and you're just a pleasure to be with. So
Well,
I
thank you,
appreciate
Rosa.
you coming out and hanging out with me again.
Well, I appreciate you having me, and I hope your guests, they're more than welcome. Come take my tour. It's the website is whiskey-row-walking-tour.com, and they can go to my website and book their tour.
All right. Very good. Well, you know where to find him, and then subscribe to the Lou Review podcast for more great locals who are doing great things in Louisville. And I'll see you in the next episode.